My husband and best friend's secret affair led to a pregnancy. Now they're asking me to help raise their child like one big happy family. My name is Emily, 34F, and for as long as I can remember, I've prided myself on being able to trust the people closest to me. My husband, Daniel, 36M, and I have been together for over 10 years, married for 7. He's always been my rock, my safe place, the person I could count on no matter what. And then there's my best friend, Sarah, 33F. We've been inseparable since college. She was my bridesmaid, my confidant, my go-to person whenever I needed advice or a shoulder to lean on. Together, we were this close-knit unit, a small family in our own way. But as they say, the bigger the trust, the deeper the betrayal, and I was about to learn that the hard way. It started with a nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach, a feeling that, at first, I tried to brush off as paranoia. I noticed Daniel and Sarah exchanging glances that seemed to linger just a second too long. Small things began to add up. They'd have inside jokes I wasn't in on, share stories about events I couldn't recall being a part of. I told myself I was overthinking it. After all, Daniel and Sarah had known each other almost as long as I had known each of them. It made sense that they'd have their own connection, right? Still, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. Then came the night everything changed. Daniel had told me he was going on a weekend business trip, a common occurrence given his job as a regional sales manager. I didn't question it. I kissed him goodbye, wished him good luck, and went about my weekend, planning to spend a lazy Saturday with a glass of wine and my favorite show. That evening, Sarah called me, telling me she was also going out of town to visit family. Again, I thought nothing of it. Then, purely by accident, I stumbled upon the truth. I was cleaning out our spare bedroom when I found a receipt tucked between the couch cushions, one from a nearby bed and breakfast, dated for that very weekend. I knew Daniel hadn't mentioned staying anywhere locally, and my mind started to race with possibilities. I drove to the bed and breakfast, telling myself I was being ridiculous. But when I got there, I saw them, Daniel and Sarah, checking out together, laughing like they were the happiest couple in the world. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach, my worst fears confirmed in the most heart-wrenching way possible. I confronted them right there in the lobby, my hands shaking, my voice barely a whisper as I demanded an explanation. They both turned pale, looking like deer caught in headlights. Daniel fumbled over his words, trying to stammer out excuses, but I wasn't interested in his lies. I was only interested in the truth, and I could see it written all over their faces. They had been lying to me, deceiving me, and I was finally seeing the depth of their betrayal. Through tears and anger, I forced the story out of them. Daniel and Sarah had been having an affair for nearly 2 years. 2 years of stolen moments, secret rendezvous, and deception behind my back. They claimed it just happened, and that they hadn't meant for me to get hurt. Sarah tried to hold my hand, telling me she still loved me like a sister, but I pushed her away, too disgusted to even look at her. I drove home in a haze, my mind replaying the scene over and over again. My husband, the man I built my life with, and my best friend, the woman I trusted more than anyone else, had betrayed me in the most unforgivable way. I could feel the walls of my world crumbling around me, everything I thought I knew shattering into a million pieces. But as the days passed, the devastation began to give way to anger. How dare they do this to me? How dare they think they could just sweep their actions under the rug and carry on like nothing had happened? I wanted answers, justice, and I wanted them to feel every ounce of the pain they'd caused me. However, I hadn't yet learned the full extent of their betrayal, because what came next was something I could never have prepared for, something that would force me to confront the unimaginable. After that horrifying discovery, I spent the next few days in a daze, barely able to eat or sleep. My mind was trapped in an endless loop of images, Daniel and Sarah together, laughing, sharing moments that should have been mine. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, heard their voices, and felt a fresh wave of betrayal crash over me. I ignored their attempts to reach out. Sarah left voicemails, begging me to let her explain, saying she'd made a terrible mistake. Daniel sent text after text, alternating between apologies and justifications. I deleted each one without a second glance. They didn't deserve my attention. They had betrayed me in the most gut-wrenching way possible, and there was nothing they could say to make it right. But my silence didn't last long. A week later, I received an unexpected visitor. Sarah showed up on my doorstep, her face pale and drawn, with dark circles under her eyes. I wanted to slam the door in her face, but something about her expression stopped me. She looked desperate, almost terrified. "Emily, please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I need to talk to you. It's important." Reluctantly, I let her in, mostly because I needed answers. She sat across from me on the couch, wringing her hands, looking everywhere but at me. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she took a deep breath and looked up. "I'm pregnant," she said, her voice trembling. For a moment, I didn't process her words. They hung in the air between us, strange and surreal. And then, like a bolt of lightning, the full weight of her admission hit me. You're pregnant," I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. "With Daniel's child." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't plan this, Emily. I swear I didn't. It was a mistake, a terrible, horrible mistake. But it's happening, and I don't know what to do." I felt like the room was spinning. It was one thing to find out about their affair, but this was something else entirely. They had created a life together, a permanent reminder of their betrayal, and I was expected to just sit there and accept it. As the shock began to wear off, anger took its place, burning hotter than I'd ever felt before. "So, what?" I snapped, my voice shaking. "You thought you'd come here, tell me you're pregnant, and I'd just forgive you? That I'd help you raise this child like some twisted version of family?" Sarah shook her head, looking horrified. "No, Emily, it's not like that. I don't expect you to forgive me. I didn't know who else to turn to. I thought you deserved to know the truth." "The truth?" I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and hollow. "The truth is you betrayed me. Both of you did. And now you want me to feel sorry for you because you're having his child." She flinched, and for a moment I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Guilt, maybe, or regret. But it wasn't enough. It wasn't nearly enough to erase what she'd done. Before I could say anything else, the door opened and Daniel walked in. He must have seen Sarah's car outside because he looked surprised to see us together. He took a hesitant step forward, his eyes flickering between us. "Emily," he began, his voice low. "I didn't want you to find out like this." I turned to him, my rage simmering just below the surface. "So, when exactly were you planning to tell me, Daniel? Or were you just going to let me find out after the baby was born?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know. I was trying to figure things out. This wasn't supposed to happen. None of it was." I scoffed, crossing my arms. "Well, congratulations. You both got what you wanted, didn't you? A child, a fresh start. Why are you even here? You've made your choices." Daniel hesitated, then glanced at Sarah, as if waiting for her to speak. She looked down, biting her lip, before finally looking up at me again. "We want you to be involved, Emily," she said softly. "The baby, it needs family. And you're family to me." I stared at her, horrified. "You're delusional," I spat. "You're asking me to help you raise the child you conceived with my husband, after everything you've done." Daniel stepped forward, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. "Emily, please. We know this is a lot to ask, but we want you to be a part of this. We can still have a family together. We can make this work." I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare, one that I couldn't wake up from. My husband and my best friend were standing in my living room, asking me to help them raise their child, as if we were one big, happy family. The sheer audacity of it left me speechless, unable to comprehend how they could be so blind to the devastation they'd caused. I took a step back, shaking my head. "No, absolutely not. You've both destroyed my life, and now you want me to play house with you. I want nothing to do with either of you. You're dead to me." Sarah burst into tears, but I didn't care. I walked past them, heading for the door, desperate to put as much distance between myself and their twisted fantasy as possible. As I reached for the handle, Daniel grabbed my arm. "Emily, wait," he said, his voice desperate. Think about this. Think about the baby. It's innocent in all of this. It deserves a chance at a family, a real family. I pulled my arm free, glaring at him. You had a real family, Daniel. You had me, and you threw it all away. Now you get to live with the consequences. I opened the door, stepping out into the cool night air, my heart pounding as I left them behind. They had betrayed me, destroyed everything I held dear, and now they had the nerve to ask for my help. The absurdity of it all was almost laughable, but the pain was too raw, too overwhelming. As I walked away, I felt a sense of finality settle over me. There was no going back, no salvaging what we once had. My husband and best friend had made their choices, and now it was time for me to make mine. But deep down, I knew this was far from over. The baby might be innocent, but the secrets and lies surrounding its conception would haunt us all. And I wasn't about to let them get away with the life they'd stolen from me, not without a fight. The days following that encounter blurred together, my mind reeling with anger, hurt, and a growing thirst for revenge. The idea that they could betray me so completely, then have the audacity to ask for my involvement, was a twisted kind of cruelty. I felt like I'd lost control over my own life, left to watch from the sidelines as they tore apart everything I'd built. I tried to move on, throwing myself into work, isolating myself from mutual friends, and deleting social media. But it didn't take long for rumors to start circulating. I'd overhear whispers when I was out, people wondering what had happened, speculating about the baby, and worse, gossiping about my reaction. It was like living in a fishbowl, everyone watching and judging, while I tried to keep my shattered dignity intact. One evening, a message popped up on my phone from an unknown number. At first, I ignored it, but curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. "Emily, it's Daniel. Please just hear me out. I need to explain everything. Meet me at the Den tomorrow evening. I'll be waiting." I'd almost laughed out loud. The Den was where we'd first met, some trendy little coffee shop that had become our place. I wondered if he chose it on purpose, hoping the nostalgia might soften me. But the last thing I felt was nostalgia. My memories were tainted by the thought of him and Sarah together. Against my better judgment, I decided to meet him. I needed answers, closure, maybe even a chance to see him squirm. So the next evening, I walked into the Den, my heart pounding, a mix of anger and anticipation in my chest. I spotted him in a corner booth, looking almost haggard, like he hadn't slept in days. I took a deep breath and walked over, sliding into the seat across from him. "Thanks for coming," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't come for you, Daniel. I came because I want to understand why you did this to me," I replied, my voice cold. He looked down at the table, fidgeting with his coffee cup. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I never meant to hurt you, Emily. You have to believe me." I let out a bitter laugh. "Hurt me? You and Sarah planned a whole life behind my back. That's not an accident, Daniel. That's a choice, a series of them. You don't just accidentally end up with a baby on the way." He winced, the guilt evident on his face, but I wasn't letting up. I needed him to feel every ounce of pain he'd inflicted on me. "We started as friends. You know that," he began, his voice weak. "After she went through that breakup, she'd come to me for advice. One thing led to another, and I don't know. I think I was just lonely, and it spiraled out of control." I shook my head, disgusted. "Lonely? You had me, Daniel. You had a wife who was devoted to you. Don't you dare use loneliness as an excuse for betraying everything we had." He looked up at me, desperation in his eyes. "You don't understand, Emily. Things between us haven't been the same for a while. You were always so busy, so focused on your career, and I started to feel invisible." My jaw clenched, and I leaned forward, my eyes locked on his. "So you decided the best way to handle it was to run into the arms of my best friend. If you felt invisible, it was because you didn't make the effort to be seen. You could have talked to me, you could have fought for us, but you didn't." He fell silent, and for a moment, I thought he might cry. But I didn't feel sorry for him. He was the architect of his own misery, and I refused to let him paint himself as a victim in all of this. After a long pause, he cleared his throat. "Sarah and we're planning to move in together. We want to give the baby a stable home. I thought you should know." The words hit me like a punch to the gut, and I fought to keep my composure. It wasn't just that they'd betrayed me. They were building a life together, a future. I forced myself to remain calm, but a new wave of anger surged within me. "Wow, you two really thought this through, didn't you?" I said, my tone icy. "So you've destroyed my marriage, stolen my best friend, and now you're playing house like I never existed. Tell me, is there any part of my life you two haven't tried to ruin?" He opened his mouth to respond, but I held up a hand, silencing him. "Save it, Daniel. I don't need to hear any more of your pathetic excuses." I stood up, grabbing my bag, and turned to leave. But as I walked away, he called out after me, desperation creeping into his voice. "Emily, wait. We need your help." I stopped in my tracks, disbelief flooding through me. I turned back, my eyes narrowing. "You've got to be kidding me." He had the audacity to look hopeful. "Sarah's family isn't exactly thrilled about all of this. They won't support us, and we're struggling financially. We need someone we can trust, someone who can help us get through this. I know it's a lot to ask, but..." I cut him off, my voice shaking with rage. "Are you serious right now? You betray me, shatter my life, and now you want my help? You're more delusional than I thought." He reached out, his eyes pleading. "Please, Emily, think about it. For the baby's sake, we want you to be a part of its life. We can still be a family in a way." I took a step back, horror and disgust churning in my stomach. "I am done, Daniel. I don't want to see you. I don't want to see Sarah. And I certainly don't want to be a part of your twisted fantasy. You made your choice, and now you'll have to live with it. But don't ever expect me to help you pick up the pieces." Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked out, my heart pounding as I made my way home. I had thought I could get closure, but all I felt was a burning need for revenge. If they wanted to play house, they'd have to do it without me, and I was determined to make sure they'd feel every ounce of betrayal I'd endured. After my confrontation with Daniel at the den, the numbness I'd been feeling morphed into something far more potent: anger. Not just anger, but a seething rage that kept me awake at night, planning, scheming, determined to make them both pay for what they'd done. Daniel and Sarah had shattered my life, and now they had the audacity to ask for my help. But they'd underestimated me, thinking I'd fade quietly into the background while they played house. I was done being a doormat. It was time to reclaim my life, and if they suffered in the process, so be it. I started by collecting information, piecing together the details of their new life. I knew their weaknesses, their insecurities. After all, Sarah had been my best friend for years, and Daniel my husband. They'd confided in me about everything once, oblivious to the fact that those secrets would one day be their undoing. I spent the next few weeks in stealth mode, digging through social media, watching for any updates and occasionally bumping into mutual acquaintances to catch up on the gossip surrounding them. I found out they'd managed to lease a small house together near the outskirts of town. Sarah's family had cut her off after learning about her relationship with Daniel, and Daniel's job situation had taken a nosedive after some misunderstandings at work. He was under investigation for financial discrepancies, though he hadn't mentioned that during our meeting. Typical of him, always hiding things, pretending he was perfect when, in reality, he was falling apart. It wasn't hard to locate the house. I drove by a few times, parking just out of sight, taking note of their routine. They were playing house all right, with Sarah's barely their baby bump as the centerpiece of their twisted little world. It disgusted me, seeing them act like a happy family. But watching them also gave me an idea. I realized there was a way to unravel their lives even further, to destroy their foundation just as they had destroyed mine. One evening, when I knew they'd both be out, I paid a visit to the house. It wasn't difficult to find a way in. The spare key was hidden in the same spot Sarah used at her old apartment, underneath a loose stone by the front door. I let myself in, a sense of cold determination coursing through me as I moved through the house, gathering evidence of their life together. I took photos of their bedroom, the framed ultrasound picture on the nightstand, their hastily assembled nursery. I didn't need these things for any practical purpose. I just wanted a reminder of the world I was about to tear apart. In their bedroom, I found Daniel's laptop. It was locked, but I knew his password. He'd used the same one for years. Within minutes, I was in. I scrolled through his emails, finding nothing of interest at first, just mundane exchanges with his lawyer and updates from work. But then I hit the jackpot. A string of emails between Daniel and Sarah, discussing their plans, detailing their worries about the future. They were anxious, desperate even. It seemed that Sarah's pregnancy hadn't been as planned as they'd made it seem. She'd been pushing him to leave me long before she got pregnant, and he'd stalled, making excuses. She was furious at him, threatening to leave if he didn't commit, and he finally agreed, more out of fear of losing her than any real love. The pieces started falling into place. I could use this. I could tear them down, not just emotionally, but financially and socially. I copied the emails and downloaded anything else I thought might be useful. I wanted them to know that I'd been there, to feel the cold touch of dread when they realized they weren't as safe as they'd thought. Before I left a single note on their bed, scrawled in red ink. "You took everything from me. Now I'm taking it all back." The next day, I began phase 2. I made an appointment with Daniel's boss, Mr. Harper. He and I had crossed paths at a few company functions, and he'd always seemed to have a soft spot for me. I walked into his office, feigning vulnerability, and hinted that I needed to talk about Daniel. I told him that I'd recently discovered he'd been using company funds to help pay for Sarah's medical expenses. A complete fabrication, but it planted the seed of doubt. I watched as his expression shifted from curiosity to suspicion. I knew that if I spun the story just right, he'd look into it, and with the ongoing investigation, it wouldn't take much to push things over the edge. By the time I left, I could see the wheels turning in Mr. Harper's mind. Daniel was already on thin ice, and with the right nudge, his career would come crashing down. I walked out of the building, feeling a sick sense of satisfaction, knowing that I was chipping away at the life they were so desperate to build. A week later, I visited Sarah's parents. They were an uptight, conservative couple who had never approved of Daniel. They'd practically disarmed her when they found out she was involved with him, but I knew they still loved their daughter. I met them at a cafe, putting on my best concerned friend act, pretending I was there to extend an olive branch. "I'm worried about Sarah," I said, my voice trembling just enough to sell the lie. "I know she's with Daniel now, but I've discovered some things about him. Things that I think you should know. He's been manipulating her, lying to her, making her believe she has no one else." They listened intently, their eyes narrowing as I painted Daniel as the villain, insinuating that he was controlling and that he'd taken advantage of her. By the time I was done, they were practically seething, vowing to intervene and bring Sarah back home, away from his influence. I didn't care if they reconciled with her. I just wanted her world to be as chaotic as mine had become. I went home that night, feeling a sense of grim satisfaction. I'd started a chain reaction, a storm that would tear through their lives, leaving nothing but ruins in its wake. The emails, the rumors at Daniel's work, the doubts I'd planted with Sarah's parents, it was all coming together. They had taken everything from me, and now I was repaying the favor tenfold. But I wasn't done yet. I still had one last move to make, a final act that would cement their downfall. I knew their weaknesses, their fears, and I was prepared to exploit every last one of them. The calm before the storm was over. Now it was time to watch them drown in the chaos they had created. I spent the next few days in a strange state of calm, watching as the seeds I'd planted began to bear fruit. It didn't take long for Daniel to spiral. Word spread quickly within his office about the investigation. Mr. Harper had started asking questions, probing deeper into Daniel's accounts, pulling records, even interviewing his co-workers. I heard through a mutual friend that Daniel had been called into a meeting with the company's board. Rumors were flying, and I knew it was only a matter of time before he'd be forced out, if not fired, then publicly disgraced. Meanwhile, Sarah's parents had reached out to her. I knew they'd gone over to her house. I parked down the street and watched as they arrived. I couldn't hear what was said, but from the way Sarah's mother stormed back to the car, face red with anger, I could guess how the conversation had gone. They'd gone in with one goal, to make her leave Daniel. but she was stubborn just like him. She'd dig her heels in, defy them, and choose the life she thought she wanted. It would drive a wedge so deep between her and her family that there'd be no going back. The chaos I'd set in motion was unfolding beautifully, but I knew I needed one last act to tie everything together. I wanted them to feel the impact, to understand exactly who had dismantled their lives. So I reached out to both of them, asking to meet. They'd grown desperate, suspicious, perhaps sensing that something was off, but they both agreed. We met at the small cafe where I'd had my first friendly meeting with Sarah's parents. I chose a table by the window, sipping my coffee as they arrived separately, their eyes widening in surprise when they realized I'd orchestrated this meeting. They sat across from me, uneasy, exchanging wary glances. I could see the cracks in their facade. Daniel's haggard appearance, Sarah's forced smile. They looked like two people barely holding it together, which was exactly what I'd hoped for. "Thank you both for meeting me," I began, my voice dripping with false sweetness. "I think it's time we cleared the air, don't you?" Daniel narrowed his eyes, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. "Emily, what is this? You drag us out here just to make a scene." "Oh, I wouldn't dream of causing a scene, Daniel," I'd replied, leaning back and crossing my arms. "In fact, I think the two of you have done a remarkable job of that all on your own. I just thought it was time you both knew exactly what's been happening these past few weeks." Sarah looked at me, her face pale. "What are you talking about?" I smirked, savoring the moment. "I know about the job investigation, Daniel. I'm the one who tipped them off. And Sarah, I'm the one who had that little chat with your parents, feeding them just enough information to make sure they'd try to drag you back home." They both stared at me, shock flashing across their faces. Daniel clenched his jaw, a muscle twitching as he processed my words. "Why would you do this? What do you want from us?" I laughed, a sound colder than I'd expected. "What do I want? I want you both to feel the way I felt when you ripped my life apart. You thought you could betray me, steal everything from me, and walk away unscathed. You're both delusional. I wanted you to suffer, and now you are." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, and she reached across the table, her voice trembling. "Emily, please, this isn't you. We were friends." "We were friends," I interrupted, my tone sharp. "Until you decided that my life was disposable. You betrayed me, Sarah, with the one person who was supposed to be my partner. Do you honestly think I'm just going to let that go?" She fell silent, withdrawing her hand, realizing there was no room for negotiation here. I could see the weight of their actions beginning to settle on them. The realization that they'd underestimated me, that I'd struck back with a force they hadn't expected. Daniel leaned forward, his voice low and dangerous. "So what now, Emily? You've ruined us. Is that what you wanted?" "Oh, I'm far from finished," I replied, my voice steady. "You see, I've been documenting everything. Every sordid detail of your little affair, every financial misstep, every lie. I've got enough to destroy whatever's left of your reputation, and I have no intention of stopping here." I could see the panic in their eyes, and it filled me with a dark satisfaction. They'd taken everything from me, and now they were left with nothing but the ashes of their twisted relationship. But I wasn't about to stop. They needed to understand that this was only the beginning of their downfall. I stood, gathering my things, looking down at them one last time. "Consider this a courtesy. I wanted you both to know that I'm not done yet. You tried to build a life out of betrayal, and now I'm going to make sure that life crumbles. Enjoy what little time you have left, because it won't be long before you're both as alone and empty as you've left me." With that, I walked out of the cafe, leaving them to stew in the mess they'd created. I didn't look back, didn't care about the aftermath. All I knew was that for the first time, I felt free. The rage that had fueled me was beginning to dissipate, replaced by a sense of finality, of closure. They'd torn my world apart, but I'd risen from the wreckage, stronger and ready to face whatever came next. I drove away, feeling the weight lift from my shoulders. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was mine to navigate. I'd taken control, reclaimed my power, and finally, I was free from the shadows of the past. And as for Daniel and Sarah, they'd live with the consequences of their actions, haunted by the ruin I'd left in my wake. They'd know that they'd crossed the wrong person, that I was someone who refused to be broken, no matter how hard they'd tried.